The rain had started again, soft and persistent, drumming against the tin roof like fingers tapping a coffin. Eliza Mareen sat by the window, her frail hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the paper. 90 years had worn her down to parchment and bone-thin, translucent skin over knotted veins that pulsed with the last stubborn rhythm of her heart. The pen, an old fountain relic her late husband once gifted her, glistened with ink as black as the secrets she was about to spill. Outside, the village was still. The November wind carried the scent of earth and dying leaves, a scent she had come to associate with endings. Her house, a creaking survivor of time, was filled with ghosts, photographs yellowed with neglect, books half-eaten by dust, and the clock that no longer ticked. She hadn't wound it in years. Time, she often thought, didn't deserve the courtesy anymore. Her breath came slow, heavy, every exhale an act of defiance against the years. And yet, she felt a sharp alertness tonight. The mind of a younger woman flickered behind her cataract-clouded eyes. Tonight, she was no longer the quiet widow of Hollowbend. Tonight, she would finally answer the letter he wrote her 70 years ago, the letter that began her ruin. "Dear Thomas," she whispered aloud, as the first stroke of ink bled into the paper. The name itself felt venomous on her tongue, bitter, familiar. "It seems fitting that my last act in this life should be to write you. Though it is not forgiveness I offer." Her handwriting wavered, a trembling current of age and fury intertwined. Every loop, every line felt like stitching shut a wound that had bled for decades. She remembered the uprising, the fire in the streets, the shouting, the banners torn from the hands of the young. She remembered his promise, "Trust me, Eliza. When it's over, they'll call us heroes." But the morning after the betrayal, when soldiers came to drag her brother away, it was Thomas who stood beside them, his voice steady as he read out her name among the traitors. The pen stopped. She closed her eyes. The past was loud again, gunshots, screams, the echo of boots. But beneath the pain, there was calm. Tonight, her words would do what time could not. Her revenge would not come with blood. It would come with truth. The candle beside Eliza hissed as it burned lower, the wax pooling like melted bone. The room smelled faintly of lavender oil and paper, a scent that clung to her all her life, a reminder of the girl she once was, scribbling poems by candlelight before the world hardened her hands and heart. Now, every stroke of the pen carved through decades of silence. She dipped the nib again, letting the ink drip once before pressing it to the page. "Do you remember the courthouse, Thomas? The morning they came for me? You wouldn't look at me then. You let them call me a conspirator, a liar, a dangerous woman. You, who had whispered your dreams into my hair the night before." Her pen dug deep, tearing the fragile paper. The tremor in her hand wasn't weakness, it was the tremor of fury restrained for too long. She breathed through it, steadying herself. The pain in her fingers was a familiar companion now, like the ache of a wound that never healed properly. "They took my brother because you gave them his name. You told me it was the only way to save yourself. But I wonder, Thomas, did it haunt you? Or did you let the applause drown it out?" The letter grew with every memory she'd buried. She wrote of the money he'd stolen from the movement, the secret meetings with the enemy officers, the way he'd rewritten history to make himself a hero. Every sentence felt like exhuming a corpse, hers, his, theirs. Her mind flickered to the present, to the news clippings she'd collected over the years, the smiling photos of him at banquets and ceremonies, the golden medallion pinned to his chest for service to the nation. She had underlined every lie. She'd kept every proof. Her letter wasn't a mere confession. It was an execution. "You once said history remembers the victors. I have lived long enough to prove it remembers the liars, too." She sealed the first page and reached for the next, her breath hitching from the effort. The candlelight quivered, catching the glint of tears in her eyes. This letter, she knew, would not only reach Thomas but it would reach the world that revered him. She smiled faintly. Her trembling hand returned to the paper. "Now," she whispered, "let's see how truth burns." Morning seeped slowly into the room, gray and unkind. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed pale, trees dripping, the sky bruised with light. Eliza hadn't slept. Her eyes, small and sharp beneath their hood of wrinkles, followed the plume of smoke rising from her tea. The letter lay before her, sealed with the same wax she'd used in her youth, crimson as dried blood. The act of sealing it had taken all her strength, but it filled her with a strange calm. She traced the edge of the envelope with one finger, feeling the pulse of her plan, a plan 70 years in the making. On the corner of her desk sat a small, battered tin box. Inside were the documents she'd kept hidden from every prying eye, photographs of Thomas with uniformed officers, coded letters she had smuggled out before her arrest, receipts from foreign accounts that proved his betrayal. Each piece was a shard of truth, and together they formed a weapon sharper than any blade. She opened the box once more, breathing in the faint scent of old ink and mildew. These were not relics of the past, they were instruments of justice. The day before, she had called in a favor. Samuel, the son of her late friend, now worked at the Fayette Tribune. He had admired her once, the old woman who could quote poetry and plant a garden despite her failing knees. When she asked him to visit, he had come without question. "Miss Mareen," he'd said gently, "what's this about?" Eliza had smiled, her lips thin and knowing. "About truth, my dear. And history. You'll understand when you read it." She had handed him the box and a sealed letter addressed to be opened upon my death. Inside were her instructions, how and where to publish the contents, and who to contact in the capital to confirm their authenticity. She had timed it all perfectly, the documents would release the moment her heart stopped. Now, as she sipped the lukewarm tea, she imagined the chaos her words would unleash. The fall of statues. The stripping of medals. The whispers in the halls of power. Her revenge would not come in one loud strike, but in echoes. She looked out the window, watching the last leaf fall from the oak outside. "It's almost time," she murmured. Her hand hovered over the paper once more. One final letter remained, a short note, addressed to herself. The news broke 3 days after Eliza's funeral. At first, it was a whisper, a curious article tucked in the middle pages of the Fayette Tribune. But by evening, the whispers had turned into a storm. Headline after headline flared across television screens and digital feeds, national hero exposed, newly unearthed letters revealed decades of deception. The air in Hollow Bend felt charged that day, like the moment before lightning strikes. Eliza's neighbors spoke her name with a mixture of reverence and shock. The quiet widow, the kindly old teacher, had brought down a man who once stood beside presidents. The letter she'd written, her last letter, had been published in full. Samuel had done as instructed. Each word, though penned in trembling script, carried the precision of a blade honed over a lifetime. The public read her account of betrayal, the uprising, the innocent lives destroyed by one man's cowardice and greed. Her story was not bitter, it was hauntingly calm. She never begged for sympathy. She merely told the truth, and that, somehow, made it more devastating. Thomas Whitlock, now 93, watched from his coastal mansion as the world unraveled around him. His phone rang endlessly, journalists, old allies, a furious son demanding answers. But Thomas said nothing. His mouth felt dry, his eyes hollow. In his trembling hand was the newspaper, Eliza's words staring back at him. "You taught me that survival requires silence. I survived long enough to speak." He crushed the paper, but her voice lingered in the room, echoing louder than the sea outside. He saw her face again, not the frail woman of today, but the fierce young girl who had once loved him, believed him, followed him into ruin. By evening, the National Commission had called for an inquiry. His medals were suspended, his honors stripped pending review. Former allies distanced themselves, their statements curt and cold. His portrait, once hanging in the Hall of Service, was quietly removed. That night, he poured himself a drink, the amber liquid trembling in the glass. He lifted it to his lips but couldn't swallow. His reflection stared back, old, cracked, and cornered. In the quiet of his study, he whispered, "You waited a lifetime, Eliza. And somewhere beyond the veil, it felt as though she smiled. Winter settled gently over Hollow Bend, wrapping the little village in soft, forgiving light. Snow had gathered on the stone wall outside Eliza's cottage, and the ivy that once framed her windows now hung bare, brittle, asleep. Inside, the air was still, faintly perfumed with lavender, paper, and the ghost of ink. Samuel stood by her writing desk, the morning sun glinting off the brass frame of her old photograph. In it, Eliza was young again, sharp-eyed and unflinching, her smile holding secrets the world would never have guessed. He had spent weeks fielding calls, answering questions, and defending the truth she had unearthed. Yet now, standing in her home, he felt none of the noise. Only peace. On the desk, beneath the old blotter, he found the small note she had left for herself, or perhaps, for whoever might find it. They will think this was vengeance. Perhaps they are right. But what is revenge, if not the only justice left for those history forgets? Her handwriting faltered at the end, the last words thinner, as though her strength had fled with each line. Samuel folded the note gently, placing it back where it had been. Outside, the bells of St. Mary's chimed in the distance, a slow, echoing sound that seemed to stretch between this life and the next. News of Thomas Whitlock's fall had rippled far and wide. Committees were formed. Statues quietly taken down. The Academy rescinded his awards, and his memoir was pulled from shelves. But more powerful than the scandal was the story that followed, of an old woman who had waited 7 decades to tell the truth and had done so with a grace that cut deeper than hate ever could. Samuel decided her letter would remain archived, not as an exposé, but as a testament. He arranged for it to be displayed in the local museum, under glass, beside a small plaque that read, Eliza Mareen, 1914–2004. She taught us that truth, though patient, never dies. Outside, the snow began to fall again, silent and slow, dusting the graves on the hill where she now rested beside her brother. The world had moved on, as it always did. But in the hush between each falling flake, it felt as though she was still writing, her words drifting through the cold, whispering to time itself. You may forgive, but you will never forget. In death, Eliza Mareen spoke louder than history itself. The last letter reminds us that revenge doesn't always scream, it sometimes writes, waits, and burns in silence until the world is finally ready to listen.